ready. So hello, we are officially live and welcome everybody. This is the very first of a brand new series that I'm really excited to be introducing. It is the Ask the Editor series. So we will have a variety of editors coming on and we'll get to talk to them about their magazines and hear more about what they publish and what they're looking for. And today we have Lynn Domina. Lynn, I didn't even ask you, is that the correct pronunciation?
That's Domina. Right, Domina, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm so thrilled to welcome Lynn Domina from The Other Journal, which is a really interesting magazine that we will learn more about today. So welcome, Lynn, and welcome attendees. So the way I envision things, I will be asking Lynn a series of questions, but as we go along, if you have questions, just pop them into the chat and I will try to work them into our conversation. And if at any time you can't hear me or the sound or anything goes up, just let me know, raise your hand or something like that. So I just wanted to introduce The Other Journal. The Other Journal welcomes the submission of critical essays, reviews, creative writing, and visual or performance art that encounter life through the lens of theology and culture. They seek pieces that consider the interaction of faith with contemporary life, art, politics, sexuality, technology, economics, and social justice. They are particularly interested in works which present creative, alternative views that may otherwise fall outside the margins of mainstream narratives. Which I just think is so cool. And I was really excited to discover this magazine. And a little bit about Lynn. Lynn is the author of several books, including 2 collections of poetry, corporal works, and Framed in Silence. She's also the editor of a collection of essays, Poets on the Psalms. Her most recent book is Devotions from Herstory, 31 Days with Women of Faith. She earned a Master's of Divinity from the Earlham School of Religion, where she took courses in the Ministry of Writing, and she currently serves as the head of the English department at Northern Michigan University and lives in Marquette, Michigan, where she says it is pleasantly warm right now, which is nice to hear.
Yeah.
So welcome, Lynn. Thank you, and welcome to everybody. So I thought we could start, Lynn, if you want to just tell us the sort of origin story of the magazine, of The Other Journal. When did it begin? It looks like it's been around for quite a long time, which is really exciting to see in the online lit mag world.
Right.
So how did the magazine get started? What was the inspiration for it?
Well, it started quite a number of years ago when a few people who I think were otherwise acquainted with each other saw this lack, I suppose, in the publication world and sought to fill it. And you're right that it is unique in lots of ways because it not only links theology and articles that are clearly very theologically informed, although not exactly academic. They're not, they're written for kind of educated people who are not necessarily specialists, and creative writing, as well as a feature we call praxis that are more, have a more practical application, and some visual art. And they now publish a lot online first, and then we select material from that for the print version of the journal. So the same people who had originated the journal edited it for quite a number of years. But then recently there's been some turnover, and some people who had been working as the theology editors, for example, became editor-in-chief. And so we've had a little bit of change, although I don't think that will be obvious to readers necessarily.
Sure.
So I came on about 4 years ago, I think,
Okay.
as the creative writing editor. And that's the part I love, linking spirituality and creative writing in a way that often isn't, with a real focus still on craft and the ideas that you would see in more conventional literary magazines.
Yeah. One thing I noticed with the magazine is that there are 8 editors. Is that correct? Which it's pretty large for a literary magazine.
Yes.
So take us a bit through your editorial process. Do you all read everything that goes into the magazine, and are you constantly having meetings, and how does the sort of editorial process work?
It's interesting because each editor has his or her own area of responsibility. And so I read all of the creative writing submissions, but I do not read any of the theology submissions before they're published. Okay. So each kind of area editor is responsible for that area. And then after we accept something, we send it forward to the managing editor, who does another level of line editing. Okay, and then it goes on to the proofreader and that sort of thing. The editors in chief have a kind of an umbrella responsibility over all of the areas, but are much more focused on the forthcoming themes, on solicitation, on our relationship with the Seattle School of Psychology, which houses the journal. Okay. Yeah, so in terms of creative writing, everything gets forwarded to me, and I communicate with the authors. One thing that we do that is a little different from many other literary journals is we do a lot more hands-on editing with authors. And part of the reason for that is, part of the reason we're able to do that is that we don't get the thousands and thousands of submissions that some literary magazines do. So we have a little bit more time to work with authors if we would like a little bit of editing done. But that's always collaborative.
That's great. That's something I was wondering about, because I know some literary magazines will work with authors quite extensively through the editorial process, and some don't. They just don't have the resources, the time.
Right.
But it sounds like if there's something that is submitted to you that you think is promising, but not fully there, you're in a position where you can take it on and work with the author more.
Yes. And that's particularly true with the prose. With the poetry, occasionally there will be a line or an image or something that I will suggest a change with. Prose can often get tightened up some. And prose writers know that, you know, and when I've written prose, I've been asked to cut a certain amount. And sometimes, you know, the first 500 words or so are pretty easy to cut once you start going through and looking at that. So, yeah, so we do work pretty closely with the authors and do offer a lot more editorial suggestions than other magazines are likely to.
That's great. And one thing I noticed in looking at the work, which I really appreciated, was that it wasn't, the magazine is theology oriented, but it's not sort of like devotional literature.
Yes,
it's very, I would describe it as work that has a complicated relationship with faith. And one of the pieces I thought was so great, there was one called Fatherly Rage. And it was a man's account of his real anger during the pandemic, and it was very political. It was very charged, and he was sort of saying that he couldn't find a refuge in his faith, and he was struggling with that. And I really appreciated seeing that in this journal, as it seems like a sort of honest. It's the magazine seems to be seeking sort of honest confrontations with faith and theology, and not just sort of straight devotion.
Yes, right. So we certainly acknowledge the struggle that we all encounter, and we don't want to deny that. And that's often what makes for the most interesting writing. And we've published material about how people lost their faith as well as how they found it. So, or how people were exposed to new varieties of faith and changed their thinking, or their experience helped them realize that they were more called to a different kind of expression than they had thought. And so, yeah, we want to publish work that addresses those kinds of questions that are real questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I see we have our very first question, which is, are pieces outside that explore faith outside the Judeo-Christian tradition welcome?
Yeah. We identify as Christian and within the broad spectrum of Christianity, but we have published material that either challenges that or that situates itself, for example, moving from Christianity to Islam, for instance. Okay. And for example, an essay recently that talked about a young woman's exposure to Islam and what that meant for her. And so most of what we get submitted because of our identity assumes a Christian background, but we are not opposed to receiving material from other traditions. We would be unlikely to publish anything that was simply a screed against any religion, but we certainly have published lots of material that questions some foundational assumptions of Christianity and faith in general.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before. I was really struck by, I'm not sure if it was an issue or an anthology, but it was entirely dedicated to Marxism. And it was theology and Marxism, which I typically associate Marxism not necessarily with Christianity. So it's interesting to see that angle, and to see that you're exploring that angle. And look at, there was a great title for an anthology, God is Dead and I Don't Feel So Good Myself, which I thought that was great. So it does look like you're exploring different ways to come at this idea of religious faith.
Right. What we do, we have published a couple of books, but what we most often do is we have a theme for each issue. And that theme is something that can be very broadly interpreted. So, for example, the theme that we're just finishing up posting the material online for is family, right? But we define that very broadly, and different people have different thoughts about family. So the theology articles, the creative writing articles will all, in one way or another, have a connection to the theme. The next issue that we're reading for right now has the theme of reimagination. And so you could submit something that is reimagining from all different angles. So for example, an easy example is, are you writing in response to a story in the Bible? Are you kind of writing back to it? Are you imagining what a character was thinking beyond the details of the story that's actually there, right? That's an easy way to approach that topic. But there are all kinds of other ways, reimagining our own social situation. If you want to talk about kind of socialism, there's, early on in Acts of the Apostles, there's a line about how they shared everything in common, right? So how could we reimagine our society in a way that fulfilled that kind of idea? Or, reimagining church, reimagining prophecy, anything like that.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're open to the flexibility of our authors interpreting our themes in ways that we don't expect. That's one of the fun things
Mhm.
that happens when you're reading submissions.
Sure, that's great. And another question here, have the pandemic and the last 4 years of politics affected what you are looking for in submissions?
Yeah. Well, just before the pandemic, we published an issue on health and healthcare. So if we were publishing that now, I'm sure it would look very different.
Yeah.
Right. But we have received submissions for all of our themes that have been influenced by the pandemic. You know, in the family theme, what does it mean now when you're all in lockdown together? Okay. Or what does it mean when you're caring for someone who is whose health is compromised, okay, in this era? And for the reimagination theme, you know, it's both of those aspects of our current situation, the issue of national health, as well as the divisiveness that is going on in the United States right now, and will likely continue for a little while, is shows up in submissions. And so we're not opposed to anything like that. We're not necessarily seeking it out intentionally, but it's unavoidable, right? Because this is what people are thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering that if you might be, if you're being deluged with submissions of related to if you would be trying to avoid that topic, or
Oh, no. We're unlikely to publish something that is extraordinarily partisan, simply because that's not really our purpose. However, we wouldn't automatically reject something that talked about the current political climate either.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
yeah.
And another question, how does your relationship with the field of psychology, given your location in a school of psychology, affect your interest in various themes and approaches?
Yeah, it depends on the topic to some extent that we're looking for. I think it affects the theology submissions a little bit more, but we're really in many ways quite editorially independent. Okay. So people are educated, some of the editors are educated in this way, but we don't expect that our submitters would necessarily have that perspective. Yeah.
That makes sense. One thing I always tell my students and people when I'm giving advice about submitting is to sort of start making a cognitive map. So if there are literary magazines that you're interested in, are there other similar literary magazines out there that are doing things that are related either stylistically or content-wise? And when I discovered your magazine, I immediately thought of Image Journal.
Image, right.
And I was wondering if there are other magazines that you know of that are doing similar work, and also if there's ever any kind of collaboration, or because it does seem like such an interesting and specific niche.
Yes.
And it really seems like Image would be like a good kind of sister journal. Good.
Yes.
For you.
There are a few different journals that are on the creative writing end that are very interested and focused on spirituality or religion. So Image is probably the most prominent. There's another one called Relief that is, I think specifically Christian. There's another one called Rock and Sling.
Oh yeah.
Okay. There's one, and you know, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's Tiferet,
Oh
Tiferet.
yeah, Tiferet, I would
Tiferet, yeah.
say that.
That is broader
Mm-hmm.
in its perspective, but has a often it certainly originated with a focus on spirituality, but um, not at all specifically Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there are a couple more that I'll probably think of as we're going along the line. But yes, we often meet up. For example, there's a conference sponsored by Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the Festival of Faith and Writing, which ordinarily is every other year, but it was supposed to be last year, and so that got canceled, but there will be one. I think now they're looking at 2022 as the next one, but almost all of us are there in the book exhibit room. And
Mm-hmm.
so many of the editors know each other and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So the difference between them and the other journal is the fact that we also publish the theology articles and that sort of thing. So creative writing is a component of the other journal, but it's not its sole focus.
Sure. And you have, to take us through your magazine a little bit, you have a lot of different sections. I don't know if other magazines do this as well, but there's some pretty in-depth art criticism, which
yes.
I found really great. It's absolutely worth reading. Really interesting. And I think you described it very precisely, that it's not academic, it's clearly for a high caliber thinker, and it's somebody who might be interested in academic approaches like cultural theory, linguistic theory, but it's not academic in writing.
Right, right.
The writing it sort of appeals to a layman, but it has kind of, you can see the academic influences, and I suspect a lot of the writers for the reviews and criticism are academics themselves. They seem to sort of have that.
I think many of them are. Some are people who work in areas of religion outside the academy, but we try to avoid a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
But we do try to tackle sophisticated problems and sophisticated questions.
Yeah. So there's some great, people should check it out. There's film reviews, art reviews, book reviews.
Yeah. I learned a lot from reading the other sections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really interesting. There's a great review of Douglas Copeland's art. I had no idea he's a writer, and I had no idea he was a visual artist as well. So there's an interesting review of his work. So there are a lot of different sections and categories.
Right.
Absolutely worth checking out. So one thing I was also curious about is how, so it looks like you're mostly online and you have all these different features to the online magazine, but you also have a print issue. And now does that come out once a year, and is that different from the online material?
It comes out twice a year, and it's composed almost exclusively, but certainly primarily, of material that we've posted online. Being able to post stuff online lets us accept more things than we might otherwise be able to if we were exclusively print. And so we, after we have finished posting the material online, the section editors all get together and discuss what we're going to include in the print version. And if a section editor is really enthusiastic about a piece or two from that particular section, we pretty much always support that. But the amount that gets reprinted depends on how much we accepted in the first place. So when we have a lot of really good and interesting submissions for a topic, we're able to post a lot more online, and then we might only include half of it in the print version. If we have fewer submissions for a given topic, then a greater proportion might end up in the print version. But it's really nicely produced.
It is. People should
Yes.
take a look. The covers are gorgeous.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. It's a journal whose production values, I think, are as high as the standards for the content. Okay, and that's what makes me proud to work for it, because I can hold it up and say, look at this. It's
Right.
you know, it's very attractive, and so I think people who publish in it then are equally proud to appear in it.
Which is
Yeah.
really important, not to be taken for granted, because I've had work appear in places that I see the presentation and it's sort of
Yeah.
disappointing. I've seen magazines publish work with just rampant typos. I mean, it's
Yeah.
astonishing. Like highly regarded magazines.
Yes.
So many typos, and
Yeah.
sometimes the online presentation is just really not great. And so
Right.
it seems like the other journal is working very hard to present the writers in a really
And
beautiful way.
you know, I understand, because especially in print, all those materials are expensive, right? So if you have a very limited budget, you have to make choices within that. But one thing that also often happens is we forget that things like typesettings and design are real skills. And just because we can operate a word processing system doesn't mean we have those skills, right? And so it's, I think editors are prudent when they bring in people who have design skills.
Yes. And I would also like to add marketing skills.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I think many of us writers
you want to see
resist the
if your
most.
work is getting published, you also want to know what are the editors going to do to help get that work out into the world.
How are we going to make sure somebody reads it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So another question was, roughly how many poems, stories do you accept per year?
Well, I will tell you, we get submissions, probably we get the most submissions of poetry and then creative nonfiction. We get the fewest submissions of fiction in the creative writing area. I would like to receive more fiction. But I usually, in the creative writing area, I aim to have about 80 pages, okay, for each issue that posts online, for each online version. And the breakdown between poetry and prose varies. So for example, in the family issue, I got lots and lots of poems, okay? And with some other topics, maybe a different proportion. I do find that, and this is more often true for fiction, but it is also true for poetry. Sometimes people send us material that doesn't attend enough to craft, and they're wanting to write about an idea, right? And they put it in the form of fiction, but it's too didactic, or it's too predictable, right?
I'm smiling because I am guilty of that in my own writing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really looking for fiction that's very character driven, and where people are wrestling with the kinds of questions that we want to consider in the other journal, but that the writer didn't start out with an idea necessarily. The writer started out with interest in a character, right? Or image or something like that. Okay. Sometimes we do get some what we would call more devotional verse submissions, and there are publications that are interested in that, but for the other journal, we are looking for poetry that does pay attention to craft and still is able to be about something, right? But that is able to use imagery and figurative language well, and the writer's aware that line breaks are important, right? They're choices that people make, that writers make, not just verse, right? So.
That makes sense.
yeah.
Story first, language first.
Yes, yeah.
Is there a particular piece, I don't know if you want to single out any of your writers, but is there a particular piece that you're really proud of, that maybe you worked with a writer for an especially long time, or that sort of exemplifies the mission of the magazine?
That's hard. It would be hard for me to answer that question. However, by the time something is posted, it has been gone over very carefully by at least 3 different people.
That's great.
Yes, myself first, and then I work with an author if I have suggestions pretty closely, and then it goes up to the managing editor, who often has, and he's really well trained as a copy editor, so he will often be able to make some suggestions that didn't occur to me, and then it finally goes up to our proofreader.
Okay.
And yeah, so by the time it's posted and or printed, it's been responded to by a number of different people. So by the time it's on the other journal's website, it's had a lot of attention.
That's
and yeah.
What is the turnaround like? So if a piece is accepted, will it typically go up within 6 months?
Yeah, that can vary widely. I do try to stay on top of things pretty well in terms between the submission date and the acceptance or rejection date. Okay, that very, very seldom do I take longer than 2 months, or certainly 3 months, and lots of times less than that.
Okay.
After it's accepted, it depends on where we are in the cycle, right? So we just started reading for the reimagination theme, and we will be reading for that for at least a couple more months. But that material won't be posted online until the fall.
Okay.
So if I accepted something in late February, it's going to be 6 months or so probably before it gets posted.
Yeah.
But if it's toward the end of the cycle and I accept something in June, then maybe it won't be that long, right? And it also depends if we get, if we don't get as much as I would like, I can extend that reading, and then it might get posted quite quickly. Okay. But it's usually several months, but usually not longer than a year.
Okay. That's great. Several months is pretty
yeah. But then after, the lag between the online and the print journal, that can be a little longer.
Okay. And a question, how have your interests and tastes evolved over the years?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That's interesting because myself, I'm primarily a poet. I write more and more nonfiction these days. I used to write more fiction, but I haven't written any fiction myself in quite a while. My tastes have grown a little bit more complex than they used to be. However, I've also accepted some material some poems that are pretty also straightforward and maybe a little narrative, but are highly imagistic. So for example, there are a couple poems in the family section that are written by a man named Martin Akatz, one about his sister. And I heard him read that poem, and then we were just beginning the family theme, and so I solicited that from him. But that's unusual. Okay, usually everything we publish just comes in as submissions. What often happens with submissions is it's not necessarily that my preferences have shifted, but we will get something submitted that's just unusual, that I haven't seen before. and I love it.
Mm.
But I wouldn't have been able to say this is what I want because I didn't even know it existed, right? I accepted something for the reimagination theme recently, so it won't be posted for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But stylistically, it's really unusual, right? And so I've kind of taken a real risk,
Yeah.
okay, in accepting it. But I thought it was so imaginative.
Yeah.
It's about the Trinity, okay, and it's really an imaginative take on it. And so I loved it when I received it. But it wasn't because of my predisposed aesthetic. It was that it was so imaginative, right? Yeah. Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that must happen a lot. I see a lot of magazines in there, when they talk about what they're looking for, they often say, surprise us. And I think that's exactly why, because it's
and I understand as a writer the frustration, because how do I know what to surprise you with if I don't know what you've read? But I will say, you know, I've worked on other magazines over the years, and it's a really good experience for any writer, because if you ever have the chance, because you get to see what people are doing over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though your version of it may be quite good, it's using the same little gesture or something that we've seen in many, many other pieces. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of, then when you see it in your own writing, you're like, oh, that's been done. It's been overdone, right? But you come to understand that because you read hundreds of submissions, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas by the time you read what's selected for a publication, you don't know that they rejected this same kind of strategy because they saw it over and over and over again.
Sure. Yeah. Are there currently any such opportunities with the other journal? Any kind of internships or reader opportunities?
Sometimes there are sections that use internships, but I don't myself, because I don't feel like I have so many submissions that I can't handle it myself. Okay. Yeah. But there are lots of other journals often affiliated with universities, but there are lots of others that are not. And every once in a while I'll see a post. Now I just saw, I think the Museum of Americana, if you're familiar with that journal, they're looking for some editorial positions in a couple of other places. But so if you kind of stay connected in that, to the kind of literary journal scene, you will see when they come up. Yeah.
That makes sense. Sure, why don't we take maybe 2 more questions, if there are any other questions. If not, I want to talk again about you have a call for submissions right now, which is the reimagination. Is there a deadline?
It's the deadline's not firm, okay, but I definitely will be reading for that theme. It's March, at least through May, the end of May. Okay, probably a little bit into June even. Currently, I've accepted a few things, but in terms of pages, not very many. Okay. I've accepted definitely maybe about 20% of what I hoped ultimately to accept. So there's still plenty of space in that.
Plenty of space, writers.
Yes. So generally anyone can just submit to submissions@theotherjournal.com, but if it's creative writing and you want to, you can send it directly to me, which is just Lynn@theotherjournal.com.
Oh, great.
So yeah.
And the website is theotherjournal.com.
Right.
So everybody should go read it, explore it. There's some really interesting work there, a huge variety of approaches and styles and reviews and criticism and fiction and poetry. It's really neat. It's a beautiful journal, beautifully designed. So congratulations.
Right. And I know all editors say this, but if you look around, you will see what has attracted us in the past. And I think you'll be able to tell when you read the creative work and the other work also, but you'll be able to tell why we selected certain work, that it was unquestionably well written. Okay.
That makes sense. And when do your issues come out, the hard copy issues?
We're hoping to have them come out each fall and spring. Okay. A little bit of flexibility within those parameters depending on the printer we use and what other work they have ahead of us. But I suspect the next print issue will be available by the end of the summer or early fall.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Maybe before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it available in bookstores, or do we have to order it from the
The best thing to do is order it. Okay. We try to go to that Festival of Faith and Writing every time it occurs, and perhaps some other smaller conferences. Okay. But you're unlikely to pick it up in a bookstore that features magazines. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions for Lynn? All right, well, thank you all so much. Anything else you want to tell us, Lynn, or should we?
Well, if you're introduced to the magazine through this interview and you want to submit something, feel free to say in your cover letter that you discovered the other journal through this interview or video, and I will make sure I pay attention to that. And it also helps us to know how people come across the magazine.
Absolutely. Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, all of you guys. I think some of you are my former students and Boston, Grub Street people. It's really, really good to see your names and faces. And just thank you for coming. And thanks again, Lynn. This is really, really helpful, truly.
All right. Thank you for doing this.
Guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.